Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. As ever, if you hit subscribe, we land in your feed automatically, and we're grateful you can rate, review, and subscribe to us. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. So we approach the end of the football season and already the controversy surrounding the European finals.
I think UEFA are probably hoping for a sort of quiet couple of weeks around the Europa League and Champions League finals after last year in Paris, but not to be. Issues already coming up, the Europa League final in Budapest. Lots of people commenting on film that was posted on social media about fans going through turnstiles two at a time. There's stewards apparently not stopping them at all. Got Jose Mourinho, I should say. Looks like he's going to be in hot water for a foul-mouthed rant at Anthony Taylor, sort of a deliberately provocative incident after the match in the car park where he clearly knew he was being filmed, but that's one for UEFA's disciplinary people. And the Champions League final referee, also the World Cup final referee, now under scrutiny, guys. This is quite a serious thing.
Quite a lot to unpack, Martyn. One at a time. Just on that video of the ticket turnstile there, it's quite obvious what happened and the fact there wasn't enough security. So if you look at it, and it's widely available, you see these tickets which are printed on a paper, which is the new thing, going to a scanner, which will open the turnstile. And what happened over and over again would be at least two people would squeeze in to the turnstile as it as it opens. So two or three people get in on every ticket. And there's a steward there in a yellow tabard, which is that little yellow waistcoat thing, watching them come through. I think these were Roma fans. I mean, it's quite remarkable, especially if it's a UEFA final, given the history that UEFA has had and the barracking it's had over the recent finals. You'd have thought they might have been a little bit more careful.
And they've got that report from Paris, which talks about actually how to improve things in future, or action they should be taking. It's got to create a lot of concern about what could have happened.
Yeah. Oh, also, there was a pitch invasion at the end of that game as well. I think Martyn's laundry list there, I think you might have skipped the pitch invasion at the end of the game when I think the Sevilla fans from the end behind the goal where the penalties were came running onto the field. So you can add that to the list of things there. I don't know why they find it so difficult.
And then Jose Mourinho, after the game, after losing on penalties, talked about not losing their dignity. And then we saw him trying to chase Anthony Taylor.
And losing his dignity.
I thought that was a sort of deliberate, very public demonstration by Mourinho just to sort of try and sort of tailor the news agenda in the way he wants it.
Yeah, that's not a bad take. Also, it reminds me of another famous Mourinho car park UEFA final episode. This was more uplifting, I suppose, but again, it was filmed and it's become a meme, and it's like this hugely popular thing among Inter Milan fans. They won the Champions League the last time they won it, and there's Mourinho and Marco Materazzi in this very tight embrace after Inter won the Champions League final, I think about 10 years ago. And again, same situation, obviously different circumstances. He was kind of happy there, not berating an official here in the case of Anthony Taylor.
But surely this conduct does raise into question, if there isn't a sort of full apology, his role on things like the new UEFA advisory board full of coaches, if he's meant to be setting the example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine there'll be pressure for UEFA to look into that and decide whether they want him to continue on that board.
Because it's not just about the top level of the game. One of the things, if you remember back to the IFAB meeting in London in March, with Gianni Infantino talking about conduct towards referees, the abuse that they're facing. And this is throughout the game, isn't it? It's particularly in the grassroots where it leads to a struggle to even get referees to become part of the game, and then how do games take place. And just this week, the FA in England announcing plans to deduct points from teams in the grassroots games if there are sort of violent offences. And here was Mourinho right at the top of the game on such a high-profile occasion, being caught on camera so abusively.
Yeah, I thought it was a good move by the FA to bring that in, because I think tackling the abuse of referees at all levels, but particularly grassroots level, is really important. Yeah, it just leaves a really nasty taste in the mouth, the Jose Mourinho thing. He probably thinks he's been clever. I hope most of the people think he's been an absolute disgrace.
I tell you what was quite disgraceful as a consumer. God, that was a horrible game to watch. It was a Mourinho team stinking up a final, hoping to nick one, and it went on. I think there was, with all the extra times and all the injury times, it went on for about 147 minutes. If you add on all the various minutes, more players booked on the Roma team than in any other final. Half of them were on the bench. It was just horrible to watch.
147 minutes must be a record for a game that wasn't suspended at any point.
No, yeah, absolutely. It just seemed to be interminable.
Just to go back very quickly to the security lapses, I mean, I think it's very important that the Budapest authorities, the Hungarians, are sort of held to account for this as well. And if they're bidding for finals in the future, it's sort of, this is a black mark against them, because I think that's the only way. I mean, it's a UEFA final. UEFA have ultimate responsibility, but the local hosts, they have to do better. And I thought that the amount of stewards, as you say, when the pitch invasion happened, there's just nobody there. It was like ridiculous.
And it's not going to get any easier, is it? You've got this stadium in Prague, which is tiny. Tens of thousands of West Ham fans for their game against Fiorentina are determined to go to spend the day in Prague. That's not going to be easy to handle for UEFA. And then on the Saturday, it's the Champions League final at the Ataturk Stadium in Istanbul. Finally, Istanbul gets its Champions League final. These aren't easy venues and easy finals for UEFA.
And scrutiny over the choice of referee for that Champions League final as well, between Manchester City and Inter Milan.
Simon Marciniak, who refereed the World Cup final, has been identified by an anti-racism group in Poland, saying that he has promoted and participated in a recent event organised by the Polish far-right leader Sławomir Mencen. And this isn't any sort of, standard far-right person. This is a sort of overtly racist, overtly anti-Semitic, overtly homophobic person.
He's a big referee. He refereed the World Cup final in Qatar between Messi and Mbappe. Sorry, between Argentina and France, and a bunch of other big games as well, hasn't he? He's quite a big personality. You wonder how he's ended up promoting this right-wing character, given he has such a sort of big profile internationally.
Strange, risky thing to do, you'd say, for somebody in his position.
And still scrutiny of him retaining his position of Champions League final referee, despite UEFA accepting his profound apologies and clarification. That was him claiming not to know that this conference was associated with a Polish extreme right movement. He said, "Had I been aware of the fact, I would have categorically declined the invitation. I am committed to learning from this experience and ensuring that such lapses in judgment do not occur in the future." And UEFA themselves did accept the fact an anti-racism group, Never Again, was accepting that he would be retained as the Champions League final referee. That Champions League final between Inter Milan and treble-chasing Manchester City after they wrapped up the FA Cup victory following their Premier League triumph too. Well, what a fraught week it is in the world of sport, and not just in football as well. At the French Open in Paris, it's been a week of all sorts of tumult on and off the court there. And let's first of all look at Novak Djokovic. And after one of his victories at the French Open, he wrote, "Kosovo was the heart of Serbia" on the camera. And then afterwards in the press conference, talking about how painful what's going on in Kosovo was to him at the moment as a Serb. And he talked about the way our people are practically driven out from the municipalities. Now, this might seem like going back into the last century for some people. If we think back to the war, the Serbia-Kosovo war, which led to the NATO peacekeepers. But certainly the tensions continue between Kosovo and Serbia.
Yeah, Djokovic he's never made any secret of his views on that, hasn't he? I think even 10 years ago or more, he was posting pro Serbia statements around Kosovo. It's this interesting thing about where politics crosses into sport. He's one of these people. I'm sure most of the time, when it talks about whether Russians or Belarusians should play, he'll be saying, "Oh, politics shouldn't cross over into sport." Yet here he is.
Yeah, and this particular flashpoint, Kosovo, Serbia, Albania, is kind of with us, ever present, and it flares up occasionally, isn't it? You remember in the World Cup, there was a game between Switzerland and Serbia, and Switzerland had Granit Xhaka on the field, the Arsenal player of Albanian descent, and he had an Albanian flag stitched in his boots, and also made the double eagle symbol when he scored a goal, and that led to a melee on the field. There was also an incident when a drone was flown at a World Cup qualifier, and that led to chaos on the pitch with players trying to grab this flag that was hanging from a drone. And here we have Djokovic. But their point is this is his view, obviously, and the same tournament you have, I guess, this different conflict, this pro-Ukrainian sentiment as well, and this is where it gets difficult, right? Which one's acceptable, which one isn't, and who decides? And this difficult for sports leaders, isn't it?
Well, we have had a Ukrainian player booed, haven't we, at the French Open already? That was because Marta Kostyuk wouldn't shake hands with her Belarusian opponent.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit of a strange reaction, given people should know what the tensions are there. And we've had Sabalenka, the Belarusian. She's openly supported the president of her country. You would say a guy who's little more than a dictator. Yeah, you can see why the Ukrainians may not be rushing to shake her hand.
In the game you mentioned there, the opponent did go into the press conference after. Was she Russian or Belarusian, Rob? The opponent in the game against the Ukrainian player, Belarusian, right? So she went into the press conference and did say that she opposes the war and said no one with a brain would support what Russia is doing in the war. And she wanted to make that clear as well. So it's a shame that happened on the.
But then she had, I've no comments for you when asked about her relationship with the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, who has been described as Europe's last dictator. I suppose you could think of the threat to her personally if she did publicly come out against Lukashenko, but it did create quite a frosty reception into that press conference and raise questions about her own status.
Yeah, massively. And the thing you raised there as well, athletes have been punished heavily in Belarus. Athletes who took part in pro-democracy protests in the past in Belarus have been beaten, have been arrested, imprisoned. And then there was that case at the Tokyo Olympics when the Belarusian athlete was hauled out of the team, taken in a van to the airport in Tokyo, and they tried to sort of drag her onto a plane, and she claimed asylum. And this is what in the Tokyo Olympics, one summer, 2 summers ago.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting now when these players come to Wimbledon, because obviously they weren't there last year. There's the ban on Russian and Belarusians, but this year they will be there. So that will be very interesting.
While we're talking France, we're 14 months away from the start of the Olympics in Paris, but they've lost the president of the games, haven't they? Just latest chaos surrounding the build-up to the Paris Games.
Yeah, Brigitte Henriques, a former official at the French Football Federation, didn't last very long at the French Olympic Committee, which seems to be, like many sports federations in France, be it football, handball, basketball, rugby, in a bit of disarray a year before the Olympics. There was a lot of factionalism then. Funny enough, I was going to write a story about Bridget Enriquez as the Olympic Committee president, but before we got the chance to publish it and sent the questions over, she'd resigned, unfortunately. So it's not as interesting when someone's a former president of anything, and so that's one that has met Mr. Spike.
What can you say? What you were planning to run a story about?
Yeah, well, it's to do with the French Football Federation and about a football official in France who was under investigation for allegations of sexual harassment, and asked a bunch of Football Federation officials, including Enriquez, for a letter of support, which she duly provided. And then it turns out that she had been at least emailed the fact that this guy is under investigation. Her lawyer has spoke to us, sent a statement saying she hadn't seen the email and she didn't know at the time. She was only providing a professional endorsement on his skills as a football official and not his character. But anyway, that was one of the allegations, that one of the accusations that she didn't do enough at the time at the French Football Federation. But there's all sorts of other things going on.
Well, of course, FIFA are partly based out of Paris these days, and questions over the sort of lack of action over what's been going on at the French Football Federation. Particularly, of course, they were the hosts of the last Women's World Cup in 2019, and a lot of the focus now is on the build-up to this year's Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, and this very public row which continues over whether or not the Women's World Cup will even be shown in the UK, France, Italy, Germany and Spain, with FIFA still to do TV rights deals in those countries, and the sports ministers from the 5 European countries issuing a joint statement of concern this week and calling for a deal to be done. The statement, though, doesn't actually lay the blame on either side. It's not actually demanding the broadcasters pay more or demanding FIFA grants those rights.
What's the point of that, Ziggs? That statement from those sports ministers, what's the point of it?
Well, that was immediately my thought, actually, when I read it. What are they saying? They're not saying that they're going to try and get a compromise. They're not going to intervene. They're not going to try and help. It's just, we're worried about this.
But who's the audience they're trying to reach with that statement? I was wondering, who are they talking to?
Well, they're trying to
look like they're doing something while actually not really applying pressure.
And these countries you mentioned, Ziggs, they're all different, aren't they? Britain, the UK, the TV market is different to Italy, to France, Spain, Germany, whoever, Italy. And Britain have offered 10 times more than the Italians, for example, haven't they, for ITV and BBC for England games?
Yeah, just about 10 times
for all the games.
Yeah, for all the games. Sorry, yeah, for the World Cup, they've offered 10 times more. And from what I understood, FIFA initially were very pleased and were happy to close the deal, and then it went to another desk.
Yeah, as I understand it, the British broadcasters, ITV and BBC, believe they had a deal in place in November. Then, of course, we had the Men's World Cup, and we got into the year of the Women's World Cup, and it seems like Gianni Infantino won't sign off on it. We heard him at the Congress in March berating the broadcasters for not paying enough. Are we in a situation now where Gianni Infantino said this, and now his staff have to deliver and extract more cash from the broadcasters? Perhaps a tough position so close to the tournament.
I mean, if they had a deal in November, they should have signed it, because they should have been alerted to the fact that Infantino a month before had already expressed concern about the level of the broadcast rights and the fact he didn't think it was enough. So unless they've got something in writing from him which they can use, then I think then you can't really just go back on that. We had a deal. Well, if you had a deal, then you got to sign that deal.
Yeah. Take your point, Martyn. But you've got you've got two sets of broadcasters there that are historic FIFA partners, people that you deal with all the time. They were in, maybe in a good faith negotiation. You need good relations, because you also, if you think about it, these are the people in all these countries that are going to push the brand out, push the tournament out, sometimes often at a loss, to grow football, which is FIFA's aim, and this is the platform that does it. So now, even when it is signed, these people are going to do it feeling pretty unhappy with the relationship, which 6 months ago, whenever that date Rob said November 2022, was a good one.
And FIFA have been trying to sort of put their case across, certainly to the media. And if we look at some of the coverage, I've seen reference from 2002, quotes from British broadcasters talking about the great appeal, the big audiences they expected from the Men's World Cup in South Korea and Japan, despite it being in an unfavourable time zone with the matches being in the morning. But it is a very different position the Women's World Cup is in. The Women's World Cup's only 3 decades old. The Men's World Cup is almost a century old. And perhaps the question is put at FIFA's door: why didn't they start the World Cup much sooner for women? Why did so many countries obviously have women's football banned? So the men's game has benefited from that development, that progress, that competitive edge, whereas it's probably quite realistic that in the Women's World Cup, a lot of the focus for particularly UK market would be on England, maybe Ireland, who are making their debut, perhaps the US, whereas obviously in the Men's World Cup, there is that huge interest in other nations as well.
Infantino would say he wasn't in charge when they didn't do anything. He obviously got into power in 2016.
But, the FA retrospectively apologised for banning women's football, for instance.
It is a blinking match, isn't it? I mean, and I think the broadcasters probably realise that they are in a stronger position, because the sort of threats about it being, we'll just stream it on FIFA.com. Yeah. Do you think the FIFA sponsors of the Women's World Cup will be happy with that?
Well, do you think the women will be happy about it? Do you think the players will be happy? Watch your audience drop off an absolute cliff edge. If it's not on a public broadcaster on a main channel, no one's going to watch this.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any desire to grow the game, which is what FIFA is all about, then they'll be sort of cutting off their nose to spite their face, wouldn't they?
Well, less than 50 days to go now for those deals to be done to ensure the Women's World Cup gets that big audience on television across Europe. Elsewhere in Switzerland, back to UEFA again, and it seems like so often talk of a salary cap has been on the agenda, mentioned by UEFA presidents, past and present, but is one actually going to happen now?
There is a sort of definite move towards it. There's a new committee or working group has been set up, all the European football stakeholders, and they've been asked to give it some serious consideration. Basically, I think the UEFA leadership want it. The ECA, headed by Nasser Al-Khalifi, are happy with it. And what it would be is a hard salary cap for a squad. So this would run alongside the sort of percentage of revenue spending limit. So in a couple of years' time, it's going to be 70% of a club's revenues could be spent on transfers and wages. I think what Schäfer and the UEFA president wants is to have, on top of that, a fixed cap. So, for example, I don't know, just plucking a figure out of the air, 500 million euros, you can't spend more than that in a single season, even if that is within your 70%. So the idea is to stop the really, really rich clubs, i.e. the English, getting even stronger and perpetuating their superiority forever.
Plucking this number out as well, Ziegs, if you see 500 million, 400 million, it's still so much more. That it's such a difficult thing to do, isn't it, to have a pan-European salary cap. But, I just think they always talk about financial regulation as the fix for this competitive imbalance. Let's do new FFP, let's do salary caps. And there's always a way around the money, as we've kind of seen. Do you think they might even get a bit more creative? You're talking about this group looking at competitive balance rather than salary caps only. Do you think something else can come up to try and make teams a bit more even, rather than here's some rules, now go and break them, and we probably won't do anything? Is there any other way? Are they looking at anything else? Is this an open-ended project?
I don't know what else they're looking at so far and other ideas. I know they are looking at the 70% thing, because there's different tax regimes in different countries. So if you're in France and you're a club, you pay corporation tax of 27%. If you're in Switzerland, you pay corporation tax of 13%. So that's a big effect on your revenues. So the 70% thing
It isn't. It's such a good faith game, though. All of this, because these aren't UEFA and police and all this. I had an agent contact me about talking about these FIFA agent rules. But anyway, he said there was a transfer from Germany to the Premier League recently. I don't know which one, and one of the clubs deposited a bunch of money in a Monaco bank account to a player's father or family account. All of these things, he said this to me. I don't know which player, I don't know which clubs. It's a big agent. And I'm like, UEFA or anyone, unless you're the tax man and you're going to really look into this, you're kind of asking all of these clubs to have these good faith relationships with you. And we've seen over and over again, you've seen Juventus in Italy under breaking rules over there. You've seen potentially English teams breaking rules. There has to be other ways than just these financial kind of regulations that UEFA can try and get a more balanced playing field. Maybe they're looking at other things. I don't know, but we don't hear from them, do we?
And what prospect of this actually being feasible within European law?
Good question.
I think you'd have to have everybody, all the stakeholders would have to be in agreement. And I think you're already they're running into a bit of problems with the FIFA Pro, the International Players Union. I mean, I think instinctively they're against anything that they think is the thin end of the wedge when it comes to restricting the amount players can be paid. So that's a big obstacle. Other sports have had it in the EU. I mean, the Rugby Premiership in England, when England was part of the EU, that worked. Rugby League as well. But I think unless you get a really, really sort of fixed competition, like restricted competition, like the NFL or the NBA, where there's no relegation or promotion, everything is very, very highly controlled, and it's quite difficult, or very difficult.
They can look at each other's books in the NFL as well. They can pretty much walk into each other's accounts, which is football is so opaque as an industry because obviously they're all competing with each other and they don't want to share all this stuff. I just think it's really difficult, and maybe just talking about money isn't the fix here.
And this will need approval, won't it, from the European Club Association? And how stable is that organisation at the moment? Because in the last week, we've had a significant figure who's leaving his club out, Edwin van der Sar, who's leaving Ajax. Also, Bayern Munich CEO Oliver Kahn fired at the end of the season.
Yeah, Edwin van der Sar said he wants a rest. He has been linked with going to other clubs before, but I can imagine I think he's been there 11 years.
He was booed off the field. Ajax spent a lot of money in the summer and basically got worse, and obviously lost Mark Overmars because of the allegations that he faced. And the fans at Ajax were furious with Edwin van der Sar. But he's done really well, hasn't he? In the broader scope, almost in the Champions League final, made a lot of money as well.
Yeah, Edwin van der Sar was also the guy who came up with the idea for the Swiss model, the new Champions League format that we're seeing from 2024, where instead of these groups of 4, there's going to be one massive group, 36 teams in it, and they don't all play each other, but they play against a variety of different strength sides, and the results from that go into this one league table. So, yeah, he came up with that first.
64 extra games.
More.
No wonder he needs a rest.
Well, turmoil there on the continent, also at Chelsea. So, a year into the ownership of Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital, one of their early appointments, the president of business, Tom Glick, he's leaving after less than a year. They are appointing a new chief executive, aren't they?
They are. It's a chap from Clearlake who's one of Chelsea's biggest investor. I think of the investor group. I think Clearlake have put the biggest amount of money there. And to me, it seems like maybe they want to get a grip of what's going on by putting their person in charge of Chelsea. But it's still a really funny setup. I don't know any other team that has like two, like co-directors of football, co-directors of recruitment, 50 odd professional players. There's so much going on there.
And Tom Glick himself, there was reporting about how he didn't act perhaps swiftly enough when the complaints made about another Chelsea executive's comments towards a female agent. And separately to that, something you've been reporting on, Tariq, the Chelsea marketing director, Gary Twelvetree, he's now left.
Yeah, so this was a really sad story. This was a legacy issue as far as the new owners of Chelsea are concerned. This is the marketing department at Chelsea when it was owned by Roman Abramovich and club was run by Bruce Buck and Marina Granovskaya. This was a marketing department in turmoil with many people having to leave on stress leave, people accusing the marketing director, ex-marketing director, of abusive behaviour, of bullying them, berating them in public, others being forced out, and around that, a well-liked member of staff who had been laid off and was suffering from stress as a result of some of this, according to his family and according to a coroner's report, took his own life, which was shocking on many levels. After we reported that last year, the new Chelsea ownership resolved to investigate the circumstances, and that investigation lasted months. Now we hear that Gary Twelvetree, the former marketing director, has finally left the club. We haven't heard from him, so to give him, the opportunity there to comment if he should want to do that.
Yeah, one of those cases about how complaints within any business are acted on, particularly when it's about how it affects someone personally.
Yeah. And to be honest, reporting this, I think there is a toxic culture in football more broadly, talking to people around the game while reporting this. And maybe, in fact, this issue has come to light, maybe some of the other clubs will look at their processes too.
I mean, you do see across the game in places perhaps people not wanting to tackle difficult issues and hoping actually things go away rather than having to take action.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful story. That when you did that originally, Tariq, it was quite difficult, wasn't it? And I think you're right. It is something that the rest of sport, actually, not just football, can look at and make sure that if people are in positions of power, then they don't abuse those powers.
Well, moving away to another issue that's caught the eye in the Premier League in particular. The season's now ended. We had the battle against relegation, which did see Leicester, the champions from 2016, going down, but Everton survived. But Everton's survival perhaps not going down too well with some of their rivals, particularly as the investigation continues into their finances, their huge losses. And it's another of these Premier League cases where perhaps there is some hope for some clarity about how long it might take until a verdict is produced.
Yeah, certainly some of the clubs are down at the bottom. I know Leeds, Leicester, among them, made representations for the financial fair play hearing to be dealt with, well in time before the start of the new season. However, the Premier League, the message came out firmly. The Premier League had no control over that, and it's up to the Independent Regulatory Commission to decide on the timescale themselves. And if we look back at, I think we've mentioned this before, previous FFP cases in the Football League, it can drag on much longer than a couple of months.
It's difficult look for the Premier League, isn't it? With two teams with integrity issues in the league at both ends of the table. Obviously, Man City with those 100+ charges. We've got no idea when serial champions, 5 of the last 6 league championships. We're still waiting for that. They deny all the allegations against them. Everton do as well. And the impact is enormous, isn't it? From an emotional point of view for all the fans, including Everton fans and the relegated fans, and also the financial aspect of it. If they were to have been relegated, would it have carried on in the Championship?
I was going to actually mention that. It's a good point. So the disciplinary hearing does carry on in the Championship. However, there is no agreement over if there was a points deduction that would carry on in the Championship, which I think most people would think FFP cases, if you look at Derby, look at Sheffield Wednesday, they've carried points deductions. So if it was a similar sort of thing with Everton, but they had happened to be relegated, they couldn't have been a points deduction because there is no agreement on that between the EFL and Premier League. So I think that is that's something which hasn't been sorted out and really should be.
There's more trouble in that Everton cauldron as well, isn't there? There was that story. I must say, Simon Goodley of The Guardian has been pretty much on top of a lot of this interesting stuff between Farhad Moshiri, the Everton owner, and the heavily sanctioned, we can say, Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov, his longtime business partner, big sponsor of Everton until Russia's invasion of Ukraine and his sanctioning. Anyway, the latest story from Simon says the UK's Treasury, its sanctions police, he describes them as, are reviewing the finances of Moshiri, and he's become a person of interest to the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation because of his links to Usmanov. And this could be quite serious for Moshiri, and then I guess serious for Everton again. Despite all the other financial issues it's facing, really, really difficult time to be an Everton fan, isn't it?
I mean, 2017, the BBC reported the Paradise Papers said that the raising questions whether the money used by Moshiri to buy Everton was a gift from Alisher Usmanov. He strenuously denied this, and lawyers acting for him said any allegation that Premier League rules had been violated were false. But at the same time, this was certainly enough questions there for the BBC to do a very lengthy investigation.
Did you find it at the back of the sofa?
No, it's all his own money. Apparently, he's independently wealthy, according to his lawyers.
Lucky him.
Yeah, perhaps some of the scrutiny Everton fans don't want, as they've only just avoided the drop, and they've got the new stadium to fund, which is due to be moved into the next couple of years, and they won't want any risks to the club's finances.
Fantastic goal, by the way. We don't talk about the game that much, but that strike by Doucouré was an absolute belter. So clean. What is a great way. Another way of Everton staying up on the last day. They've had a history of that. That was another goal that Everton fans will remember.
What a moment. I was actually a bit steps removed from the final day of the season. I was a place I've not been to before, the Isle of Man, to cover a very different sporting event, one we've never mentioned before on this pod.
The famous TT races, Rob, which usually makes the headlines for all the wrong reasons, doesn't it? In my mind, anyway, with sort of fatalities and all that sort of thing.
That is why I went across there. Last year had 6 deaths of riders, the joint most ever at the event that's been going 116 years, and there have been so many deaths, hundreds of deaths. Only 1 year in, I think, the last 80-odd hasn't had a single death at the TT races. They are going on for 2 weeks, so we're just approaching halfway through. And I was there for day one to speak to the organisers, medics, the riders, and they know the risk they're getting into. And it's an incredible event because they're racing it up to sort of 200 miles an hour through narrow streets with houses on either side as well.
Are these like professional riders who are being killed, or are these sort of like have-a-go amateurs who are entering the sort of lower grade races?
Well, some of them actually are professionals that have been taking part. Into the 1970s, it was a world championship event in motorcycling, but it lost its status and it hasn't regained it since. But there aren't the riches. People do it for the love of taking part in this thrill, the danger, and it is quite big for tourism in the Isle of Man as well. So, some people slightly critical of the fact we were casting an unwelcome spotlight in the event because they sort of see how important it is to riders, to fans, and to the locals on the Isle of Man.
How do you get to qualify for that, Rob? Is it just turn up on a motorbike and say, I want to do it, or do you have a minimum standard?
No, you do have to be licensed. You do have to prove that. But I think some people do almost get the impression you can just sort of rock up with a bike and take part. Although there are a lot of people who go into the to watch the event who bring all the bikes. There's certainly quite a noise down the streets at night. You're hearing everyone on their bikes, all the fans there.
Yeah, so quite some experience, and I imagine I've seen films of that for these incredibly tight corners, like solid walls. So there's no room for error, is there? I presume that's the reason why there's so many serious accidents.
A bit of padding across lampposts is about the only protection, but bumped into some fans from Canada who'd come over, absolutely in awe of this event, wanted a chance to see it. So it certainly does have quite an audience. But if this was any other sport with so many deaths every year, there would be questions about its viability and if it should even go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like it's like its own little bubble. By the way, you make it sound there, isn't it? Where everyone who's into it is into it, and everyone else is an outsider, and you don't really have a say. Did you meet any critics of the race while you were actually in the Isle of Man?
No, I didn't meet any critics at all. One of the reasons to head over was to see what it's all about, to see how does everyone just accept this event where there are deaths so often at it. So, it's pretty incredible to sort of witness this going ahead on the Isle of Man.
Well, I thought you were there for to see it as a status, tax haven status, if you were doing some sort of financial investigation, given a lot of the things we talk about on this.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say, Farhad Mashiri's Blue Heaven Holdings is registered in the Isle of Man. So I think you might be checking that out.
It is a favourite. And for those not aware, it isn't actually part of the UK. It is just off the Irish Sea between England and Ireland, but it is a self-governing British Crown dependency.
Yep.
So you are roaming there.
And you've got a low income tax of between 10 and 20% for an individual and nothing if you're a company. So I bet a lot of our football investors might have a document or two filed in the Isle of Man.
Yeah, what attracts them there. But chance to end up on a different sport on this episode. Good talking through, and always welcome any feedback at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.